Have you ever been surrounded by people and still felt completely alone? Not because you hate people, not because you're antisocial, and definitely not because you think you're better than everyone else, but because you sometimes look around and think, how can I explain what's going on inside my head when nobody seems to think the way I do? You say something, and people misunderstand what you meant. You try to explain an idea, and somehow the conversation goes in a completely different direction. So eventually, you stop explaining. You stop sharing. You start saying, never mind. And the strange part is that the more deeply you think, the more noticeable this feeling can become. But why can someone understand complicated ideas so easily, yet struggle to feel understood by the people around them? The answer isn't simply that intelligent people are different. It's much more psychological than that. One reason intelligent and highly analytical people can feel misunderstood is that they often don't think in a straight line. They think in layers. One simple question can trigger several possibilities in their mind. Someone might ask, "Do you like this idea?" A normal answer might simply be yes or no. But an analytical mind might immediately start asking, what exactly do I like about it? What are the consequences? What happens if we change one part? Is there a better alternative? What am I missing? Their brain doesn't just process the question. It starts exploring everything connected to it. By the time they've finished thinking, the conversation may have already moved on. They know what they want to say, but explaining everything would take too long. So they simplify their thoughts. And when they simplify, people sometimes misunderstand them. Eventually, they learn that being understood often requires translating complicated thoughts into a language other people can easily follow. And sometimes, they're simply too tired to keep translating themselves. So instead of explaining everything, they just say, it's fine, even when there's an entire thought process happening underneath. Another reason is that highly analytical people often notice details that other people simply ignore. A change in someone's voice, a pause before an answer, a facial expression that doesn't match their words, a small contradiction in someone's story, a sudden change in someone's behavior. Most people might not think twice about these details, but an analytical mind can connect them together. They may notice that something feels different before anyone actually says that something is wrong. Imagine talking to a friend who says, "I'm completely fine," but their voice sounds different. Their answers are shorter. They're avoiding eye contact, and they're suddenly much quieter than usual. You may sense that something is wrong before they ever admit it, but when you point it out, they might simply say, "I'm fine, you're overthinking," and now you're stuck. You notice something, but you can't prove it. Explaining exactly why you noticed it can sound almost impossible. So eventually, you stay quiet. After experiencing this enough times, you may start thinking, maybe it's easier if I just keep my observations to myself. Intelligent people can also question things that everyone else simply accepts. They don't necessarily accept something just because someone says, "That's how we've always done it." They want to know why. Why do people follow this rule? Why does everyone believe this? Why are we doing it this way? Could there be another explanation? Their questions aren't always meant to challenge people. Sometimes their brain simply wants to understand the reasoning behind things. Imagine a group agreeing on something and everyone says, "That's obviously the best option." Then one person asks, "But what if we're wrong?" Suddenly, the mood changes. People may interpret the question as negativity or criticism, but the person wasn't necessarily being negative. They were simply testing the idea. And when this happens repeatedly, they may eventually stop asking questions. Not because they stopped thinking, but because they learned that not every thought is welcomed. This can lead to one of the strangest experiences of all, feeling lonely even when you're surrounded by friends. You can have people to talk to. You can laugh with them. You can go out together. You can text each other every day. And still feel emotionally disconnected. Because loneliness isn't always about the number of people around you. Sometimes it's about how deeply you feel understood. You might know dozens of people, but have only one person, or maybe nobody, with whom you can talk about your deepest thoughts. So you become good at appearing socially connected while privately feeling alone. You laugh. You participate. You respond to messages. You show up. But there are parts of you that nobody sees, and that invisible distance can become exhausting. Eventually, some people begin simplifying themselves just to fit in. They hide complicated thoughts. They stop correcting people. They stop explaining why they see things differently. They may even pretend not to care about things they actually care deeply about. Not because they're fake, but because constantly being misunderstood is exhausting. Sometimes pretending to be simpler feels easier than explaining your entire mind. And over time, this can create a strange situation where people know the version of you that is easiest to understand, but not necessarily the real you. Another reason is that many analytical people crave conversations that go deeper than everyday small talk. There's nothing wrong with asking, "How was your weekend?" or talking about the weather. But if your mind constantly searches for meaning, endless surface-level conversations can become draining. You may want to know what someone is actually afraid of, what changed the way they see life, what they believe that most people disagree with, what they're trying to become, or what they think about when they're completely alone. Those conversations create a different kind of connection, and when you rarely get to have them, you may start believing that nobody around you really gets you. You don't necessarily want more people. You want deeper conversations with the people already around you. Then there's another side that nobody sees. The conversation ends. You go home. Everything becomes quiet, and suddenly your brain starts replaying what happened. Why did they say that? Did I sound weird? Why did they pause? Maybe they misunderstood me. Should I have explained that differently? A conversation that lasted 10 minutes can occupy your mind for another hour. And the frustrating thing is that you may know you're overthinking. You may even know the other person probably didn't mean anything by it, but your brain keeps searching for an explanation. Because analytical minds don't always know when to stop analyzing. They keep looking for patterns, even when there may be nothing there. But here's something important. People who feel misunderstood don't necessarily want to be alone. What they often want is connection without having to constantly translate themselves. They want someone who understands the strange thought before they finish explaining it. Someone who can disagree without turning the conversation into an argument. They don't necessarily need hundreds of friends. They may simply want a few people with whom they can finally stop filtering themselves. However, there's a danger in feeling misunderstood for too long. Eventually, you may stop looking for understanding altogether. You tell yourself, "I don't need anyone. People are exhausting. It's easier alone." And sometimes being alone really is peaceful. But there's a difference between choosing solitude and using solitude to protect yourself from disappointment. If you constantly expect people to misunderstand you, you may stop giving them the opportunity to understand you. You stop explaining. You stop opening up. You stop trusting. And eventually, the wall you built to protect yourself becomes the same wall keeping everyone else out. So maybe the goal isn't to find someone who understands every single thought inside your head. Honestly, that person may not exist. The goal is to find people who are willing to try. People who ask questions instead of making assumptions. People who listen instead of immediately judging. People who allow you to be complicated without forcing you to become simple. So if you've ever felt like nobody understands you, don't immediately assume something is wrong with you. You may simply be someone who thinks deeply, notices patterns, questions, assumptions, and wants a level of connection that isn't always easy to find. But don't let that become an excuse to disconnect from everyone. The right people won't require you to become less intelligent, less curious, or less yourself. They won't make you feel strange for asking deeper questions. They'll simply make you feel like you don't have to explain everything. And maybe that's what being understood really feels like. Not someone who can read your mind. Not someone who agrees with everything you say. But someone who genuinely wants to understand it. Someone who stays curious about you instead of making assumptions about you. Someone who gives you the space to explain the thoughts that are difficult to put into words. So if you've ever sat in a room full of people and still felt completely alone, remember this. You don't need everyone to understand you. You just need a few people who are willing to try. And sometimes, the person you've been waiting for isn't someone who thinks exactly like you. It's someone who is patient enough to understand how you think. If this video describes something you felt but never knew how to explain, subscribe, because there's a lot more about the hidden psychology of human behavior that we're going to uncover together.